study session. Do we have any public comments?
We have none registered.
Thank you. We have some items to be placed on the regular city commission agenda, which is the minutes from our November 13th study session, our November 15th regular meeting. Commissioners, did you have a chance to review those? You okay with moving those on to Wednesday's agenda? Okay, we'll do that. Thank you. Items for presentation and discussion. Item A is the compensation study recommendation for, it looks like our city manager, our HR director, finance director, city attorney. Who's up first?
Do we all need to move out?
No, I mean, do you need some more room at the table? Who wants it?
Well, this is a process that was started just prior to my arrival, and with which I was able to participate in, and I know it's something that when the city manager recruiting process was underway, this was one of the items that was at the forefront, and I can say that it is not my first pay and compensation study. In my 25 years, it's my third, and I think that you're to be commended for undertaking it, especially when you see the statistics and the demographics on retention and retainage that we're all experiencing right now. With that, I will turn it over to our HR director, Director Stegman, and we can go from there.
Well, thank you. Yes, we are excited and very happy about this compensation study. We met with department directors today and some of the leadership staff of the city organization throughout the organization. But yes, we issued an RFP for a compensation consultant in December, and through an extensive evaluation, selected McGrath Human Resources Group to be our consultant, and that project kicked off in April of 2023. It's been an extensive process, and I wanted to turn it over to Milena, who's our compensation consultant, senior consultant, and she is going to share that the study results with the governing body. If that's okay. Anything else you want to share?
No, thank you. Good afternoon to the commission. My name is Milena Halverson Mason. If it's okay, is it okay if I stand? All right, sounds good. Yeah, I think that'll work best. Otherwise, I feel like I'm going to be walking or talking away from you. So first, let me just thank you for the opportunity to be on site. Through COVID and shortly after, what we found is that within the world of compensation, more and more organizations have opted to run these processes virtually, which is certainly sufficient, but it's really nice to be able to get into the organization and meet the individuals and see your community and know that what we are doing in this process is going to help your community along with and help your employees. I have a presentation. I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible so that you have an opportunity to ask questions. And this presentation is going to be going through the main highlights of my final report that has been provided to you. You are, just so you know, see where do I need to? Hang on. There we go. Okay. You are my last meeting of the day, and I have actually been talking with your department directors and your management team since about 8 o'clock this morning. And so if I feel like I have to turn around to see where I'm at, that's exactly why. Let me just tell you a little bit about McGrath Human Resources Group. We are a public sector consulting firm located out of Tennessee at this point, but I personally live in Wisconsin. Don't hold that against me, even though the Packers won last night.
You were a cheesehead into the meeting.
What in the world were you thinking?
Yeah.
We've been in business for the past 23 years, supporting public sector all throughout the United States. And we have two different sides of the business that I think is important for you to understand about us. We have McGrath Human Resources Group, which is where I work out of. And I predominantly work on compensation and benefits, although there is some high-level policy development that occurs as well. We have another side of the company, however, and that's called McGrath Consulting Group. And this is our public safety area where we provide services to police, fire, EMS, and 911 dispatch. I'm actually a consultant that works in both locations, and so I support the police, fire, and EMS side as well. Normally, I don't bring this up, but there is a heavy component within your organization of public safety, and I just at least want there to be a level of awareness. Now, because we've been in business for the past 23 years, we are in a number of states, including the state of Kansas, and we do have a pretty strong presence here in the Kansas City area, although we do extend into other parts of the state as well. And I think that that's important simply because there's a lot that's happening within the Kansas City area in terms of the labor market, and we do have a pretty good pulse on what we have going on. Oh, and I'm going backwards. Here we go. So the city has chosen to undertake a study, and I think that that's very positive because what we have going on in the current labor market. And so what I want to do is just kind of give you an idea of what's happening on a nationwide basis. And these charts provide a summary of that. You may, I don't necessarily think that these are even in your final report. There's a company that is nationwide that helps support public sector organizations called NeoGov. Not every organization utilizes this, but there are several thousand public sector agencies across the US that do use their software, and they are an HR software. And from that, then they are able to track metrics of what's happening in terms of the labor market with recruitment and retention, because that is what their primary focus is on. What we have been noticing over the last couple of years from NeoGov, along with some other areas, is that the staffing shortages that is happening in public sector is starting to have an impact on operations. About a year and a half ago, organizations were talking about how they hope that that doesn't have to happen, but we've now turned into it absolutely is happening. And those communities are having to rethink how their operations are looking simply because they cannot necessarily backfill their positions. And what you see here on this chart here is an average of the number of applications that they have been reporting per recruitment for the last 3 years or so. And we are noticing a pretty significant decline. And specifically what's happening is that there's more people leaving public sector than is coming into the public sector. And that's really very much a challenge because there's a pretty significant gap. So even if there's a lot of reasons that this may be occurring, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The other chart that you see here is really what is the result of this. And about a year ago, HR directors, across the nation were talking, they were talking about how, what are they doing to try to fill the gap or bring in the applicants. Now we're starting to see, after having gone through this for the last couple of years, there's some real impacts, negative impacts that's happening to organizations. And the first one is the staff burnout. The second one is the amount of overtime that you're paying. And so what you're doing is you're paying out those costs. You're paying them out in a different line item. And that then results in additional burnout and then turnover. So what's happening is that the vacancies are creating additional turnover. And there's a feeling within public sector that you're getting yourselves into what we would call a vicious cycle. And I think the question is when are we going to be able to get out of it? And I don't necessarily have an answer to that. But I suspect from what I've been seeing on the trends for the last couple of years that public sector is in this now for the long haul. And part of the reason is because you've got a couple key things that's happening. First of all, you've got about a third of all local government workers all across the United States that are age eligible to retire. And when you do, and you don't have the number of qualified individuals to backfill those positions, then that is what is causing part of your challenge. And the question then becomes, well, all right, why is it that individuals are not necessarily applying for public sector work? Well, and the answer to that is varied. Right now, your new workforce coming in generationally they're different, and they have They aren't necessarily thinking about public sector as an opportunity of choice. And we don't necessarily present ourselves in public sector in a way to market ourselves as a career opportunity. There's also other reasons though why people are not going into public sector work. And part of that is the perception, real or perceived, whether about government workers and the public sector. And there are certain areas or disciplines where, you have individuals out who are choosing to leave the workplace because it's just not a positive work experience for them anymore. And part of it all does boil down into dollars and cents in terms of your wages and your benefits as well. And it's hard to compete against with what's happening in the private sector. So overall, what we're seeing here is you just have the perfect storm that is happening all across the United States. So with that said, that's really just a US look at this point. What I wanted to do was to show you what you have happening specifically within the city of Ottawa. And this is all of your employees. I have clustered them with an age band, okay? And this age band then tells us the percentage of employees within each of these ages, along with how many years they've been with the organization. And there's a couple key takeaways here. The first thing that I look at is this group of individuals right here. This makes 27% of your workforce. This is individuals that they are going to retire out. They have served their time. They're going to get ready to go, and they deserve to go and enjoy what the next chapter of their life is going to be. Those individuals also have a very high level of tenure with the organization. And your tenure with the organization is about 8.4 years, which is above average. So you are actually beating the national trend. But what you should expect is that as these people start to leave, that number could potentially start to drop because we have to take a look at what's going back in. So we know that no matter what we do as an organization for you, you're going to lose about 27% of your workforce, probably over the course of the next decade, simply because they're going to retire. So then we have to take a look at, all right, well, we know, number one, then that there's going to be some recruiting needs for the city. And how do we poise your compensation in a manner that is going to be supportive of recruitment? And then we have to take a look at what we have happening on the front end of your employee group, which are those individuals who are under the age of 40. And they are our most mobile workforce. They are the individuals that they are willing to go work anywhere for, I feel like I need to have a sense of purpose. Or I need to have maybe some work-life balance differences. And number three, and probably number one in most situations, is I'm going to go for more money. They don't necessarily have the connection to the organization. So back in the day, when many of us in this room started with public sector employment, we were graduating and we got into this and we knew that this was going to be our career. That's not necessarily the case anymore. These individuals are willing to job hop. And so when you look at this, this is 43% of your workforce. And so kudos to the organization for doing that heavy recruitment. And you have, really a good new base of employees coming in, but they don't have a whole lot of tenure. And that is the group that I worry about for you, because that is where we have to focus on your retention efforts, okay? Because if they continue to leave along with your retirees that are going to be getting ready to leave, you're going to feel the impact of your operations. So in other words, the city really does need to focus on both recruitment and retention, okay? But with that, then I took a look at, because there seems to be that there was from the turnover rates that I was looking at, there seems to be, or you have had individuals who have left the organization. So I was interested in knowing, all right, of the individuals that you have, how many years have they actually been in their current position? And what I found here is that on average, the people that you have in place here today, they've been in their position an average of 3.5 years, which means that even though you might be a tenured organization, you still are probably feeling like you're a very young organization or inexperienced, because these individuals are really growing and developing within their current role. And 40% of your employees have been in their job for less than 2 years at this point. So, this is an opportunity really for the organization, because this is your future. This is your succession model, and this is what it looks like. And for this purpose, then I say, all right, well, we need to make sure that we hold on to all, we want to hold on to as many of them as we can. But if the employees feel that the opportunity is not here in Ottawa, they're going to work elsewhere, and that could be detrimental to your organization. So this is a strong sense that, all right, so we have to do a little bit of, we have to worry about the recruitment, and we have to worry about the retention. This tells me you have to really worry about the retention. Okay, that's really where your focus needs to be going forward. So with that, then, if you don't mind, we'll talk about, unless you have any questions about the method, about this, the data, we'll talk about the study. I want to at least give you a foundation. Okay. When we do our studies, we don't do them in a vacuum. This has been a heavily collaborative process from the beginning. When we first met with the city, we met with your new administration, your human resources, and then each of your individual directors. We meet with your directors so that we have an understanding of what their responsibilities are, what services they provide, along with what those positions are responsible to do. After that, then we do what we call a paper review, where we're just looking at your compensation system in place, your job descriptions, that type of thing. And from that, then we do two main primary areas where we go out to the market, the external market, we collect salary data, so that when I am in front of a commission, then I talk to you about that we need to increase wages, that I've got some data to be able to support those findings. And I'll talk to you about those. I'll show you those on the screen here in a little bit. We collect multiple different data points for each position that is benchmarked, so that we have a good indication of what the salary ranges are out of the market, along with what individual employees are also being paid. The other part of this process then is what we call a position analysis, where every position was independently analyzed, and that helps us then develop a hierarchical structure. And an example that I can talk about, that we ended up talking about in our very last session, was that sometimes you have positions that have different levels, but within those levels, there's really not differing responsibilities per se. That maybe that secondary level was developed because an individual has been there for a long period of time, their tenure, and you're trying to get their wages elevated. So that position analysis process allows us to take a really good look at that, and then provide recommendations on what we feel is going to be the best for the organization. When I was all done and I developed those recommendations, I met with your administration, I've met with your department directors, they've all had an opportunity to provide feedback, and then I put all of my recommendations into final form, which is what is available in the final report under Appendix A. This is a list of the public organizations that we utilized to develop your market, because there's often a question of, when you're talking about the labor market, what exactly does that mean? Well, it means this right here on the screen. So when we met with all of the departments, we had a conversation about who are the comparable organizations that you feel you are similar to in terms of operations, level of service, who are you competing against for your human capital? And from that, we developed this pretty expansive list. This is a very, very hefty list. Not everyone participated, and we acknowledge that, and that sometimes happens, but we feel that we got a very, very good data set in order to give some meaningful recommendations to the city. And so that data set, the data from those organizations, is what led to our recommendations. In order to understand the market findings, because they are presented at a high level look, I put everything into what's called a comp ratio. Okay, and let me just explain what that is so that I can show you the graphs next. A comp ratio is a comparison ratio between the city of Ottawa and the rest of that market that I just had on the previous screen. And when I go out to the market and I collect all of that data, I put it into a comparative summary, so that I can see the big picture of where the city is at against the rest of that external market. Now, the numbers that are important, and I've actually color coded them, and I'll probably just explain to you in terms of the colors on the screen. We like those numbers to be a 50% comp ratio, because at a 50%, that means that you are paying identical to what the rest of the external market is paying. But if you go too low, then that means that you're not going to be market competitive anymore. And in the current market that we are in, we use a comp ratio of 45% or greater to determine whether or not something or a position is market competitive or not. So with that, does that make sense to everybody? Want to make sure I'm following along. So I'll just start talking, and I want to make sure everyone's keeping up with me here. All right, so this is what, and I apologize, it looks a little bit washed out, but This is in color code in the final report. What I did here was I took your minimum rates of pay on all of your salary ranges and I compared them against our analyzed data. And what our findings here were that all of the positions that are in red, we would identify them by best practices standard to be too far under the minimum to be competitive. That's 57% of your positions. But in addition to that, we have another cluster of positions here, about 14%, that it has a comp ratio in the low 40s. Technically, we would say, technically, by best practice standards, it could be or it should be market competitive. But right now, with the current market the way that it is, along with the Kansas City market, it is not. And so I deem these 14% of these positions to not be market competitive. And so that leaves, you've got about 30% of your positions at the minimum step would be competitive minimally, okay? But that's only one point in the data set. We did the same thing at the midpoint. We also did the same at the maximum, and our findings were much the same. You will see that there's a little bit of movement. There's a little bit of movement, but it really isn't a massive change from minimum to midpoint. And so what that tells me then is that you've got positions that simply just have a salary range that is no longer market competitive. And there is, not only do you have, perhaps the city has not been maintaining its structure against the market, you also have a physical structure issue that I'm going to bring forward here in just a moment as well. The last graph to share with you is what we call our incumbent analysis, and that is intended to give you a better idea or representation of where the positions are in totality, because this is your individual employees' actual rates of pay. So those other graphs are based upon the salary ranges, but this is where your employees' actual wages are in comparisons to the wages that we found outside within the market. This is, and when I talk about employees, I talk about it at a position level. So it's not individual employees, it is based on the position. But what we found here then, if we keep on with the same thought process, you've got about 45% of your positions that at this point, on average, they are maintaining position within the market. And so you have, just over 50% that are going to be needing some work. This is what we consider to be the most accurate reflection of the market, because this is exactly what people are paying right now. This is what the market is paying. There's no question about whether or not that minimum is, whether anyone uses a minimum, because you can have an established minimum, but not utilize it. This is really what is happening in your market. So with that, then, here's what we do. We analyze all of this data, and then we ask the question to the organization, okay, well, now what is it that we should do with it? Because we have to put it into some meaningful format for you. And part of that decision making is the discussions that I have with your department directors at the onset of the project, with your administration throughout this, about, all right, where do we want to poise you in the market? And poising you in the market is really a very important decision, because you have this range of salaries. And you could really say that you want to be aligned in any one of those areas. And overall, an organization has three options. Okay. And your first option is to position yourself within the market above average. Okay. And that means that you would be a leader in salaries. And that would be organizations then would be looking to Ottawa, that we want to, we're always competing against Ottawa, that type of thing. And they're trying to always catch up to you. There are very specific reasons why organizations might want to be above a market average. And an example might be the location that they are, or maybe they're in a much more remote area, or they are just really, they might be in a very condensed area and they have a lot of competition. You also have then those organizations that are going to align to the average. That means that they understand and acknowledge and accept. Some organizations are going to pay more than you, others are going to pay less than you, and we're going to try to get you in middle of the road. And this is oftentimes where local governments fall into place because they do need to be good consumers of the tax dollars that they are given. And they know that they have to, utilize those funds in multiple areas. The last option that you have is not reaching the average at all. And when organizations are at that point, they typically are expending dollars, but they're expending it in turnover rates and overtime, replacement costs, recruitment costs, because they are continuously going to be a training ground. And that ends up for most of those organizations being very, very expensive, but that is the philosophy that the organization has taken. So a compensation philosophy then will establish, what we've done, and it allows then your administration to bring forward recommendations to you in the future to say, all right, well, we established you at a certain amount or a certain point in the market, and this is what we need to do now to maintain that position in the market. And so what we have done for you, the recommendations, is to set you to the market average, okay? The average was determined because you are going to be going through and you have been experiencing a period of change. That period of change is dynamic, and you've got a lot of things that are going on. And I feel that if we give you a new model, that new model is a range model that's going to provide some additional flexibilities to the department directors and to administration. That combined with your new leadership is where I think that's where our starting point really needs to be. If for some reason in a couple of years, your HR calls McGrath and they say, hey, Milena, we're really struggling and we're not really sure that average is proper for us anymore, just because we are really on the fringes of the Kansas City area, which a lot of those employers are trying to establish themselves above average. We can make the adjustment at that time. I've been very open about that. I think that this is a real good starting point for you, however, though, because you're resetting all of your wages going forward.
So I've got just a quick question.
Yes.
I'm getting ahead of myself here.
That's
but
okay.
When we talk about salary, we're not talking about benefits, then are we?
We are not talking about the benefits,
Okay.
and that was not part of the scope of our project. However, I will say that benefits are they are very, very important. And, certainly we have seen, and we kind of knew it was going to be coming, that health insurance was going to, at some time post-COVID, was going to kick in. And we are hearing that a lot of organizations are impacted by that. And so there is that element of wages with benefits together. Absolutely. This is purely wages. Yeah, it's purely wages. And that does make a difference, because sometimes how you poise yourself in the market might be impacted by how you handle your benefits. Especially, you could find that your benefits are perhaps more luxurious than others, and that could actually put you in a higher position overall to the market in a total compensation manner. All right, the last thing before I get into my recommendations is this is actually what your current model looks like, whether you realize it or not, and most don't. Here's what you have going. This middle number here. This is your expected market, which is what we would call your midpoint. And your lower pay grades have a much shorter range from minimum to maximum. And that's, sometimes that's okay because, the employee will progress, but then the challenge is that they sit at the maximum and they get frustrated. And that is what leads then to, well, let's create new low levels and let's get them further up into the salary range. In addition to that, what you have going on is problematic in the lower part of the salary range, because there's such a large spread from the hiring point to the midpoint that there becomes a question of how long is an employee going to reasonably wait before they get to progress to what they would consider a market competitive wage. And so you've got a little bit of a dichotomy going on between some of your lower paid positions and some of your higher paid positions. That's problematic. And this might be part of the reason why we see that you have, roughly about 2/3 of your positions that just are not market competitive anymore. And this here, I understand it, but it's really, we don't see many pyramid structures anymore, because they just simply don't work for the current labor market that we're in. Employees need to see that progression opportunity through the range in order to help keep that employee engagement, which is what a lot of employees are looking for. They're looking for that engagement, they're looking for that purpose. And in order, that gives the managers an opportunity to provide them a performance increase and motivate them to continue to work. All right, so all of this leads up to our recommendations, and what we have built for the city. Just kind of recapping, we've set your compensation, rates at average market. And I have then rebuilt a range model for you. That range structure is going to provide flexibility to the organization for recruiting purposes. And also then it allows you to focus on, excuse me, on performance or merit, increases for the employees. You know, there always is this question of, should we have built, or should an organization have a step model? I don't believe that Ottawa is in that position. I think that you're a high performing organization with a strong leadership team, and that you will be able to rely on a merit process in order to help the employees through their salary ranges. The structure itself, there's 18 pay grades. That's probably not going to mean a whole lot, but here is one of the main differences, where you've got a 40% spread from your minimum to your maximum. But what we did then was your control point. That's your middle number. You see a minimum, a control point, and a maximum. It was called a control point, not a midpoint, because it's not the midpoint. And the reason why we did that was, and I'm just going to put on my remote here, is that we built your control point, excuse me, and then we built your minimum down from that, but we held that minimum up, and that's supposed to help you with your recruiting. We've narrowed the gap between that minimum to the control point so that the employees don't have to wait so long to get to that control point, which is what I would consider probably more that sweet spot in the market. They're all market competitive numbers, but there is this understanding of that's really where you should have a skilled, experienced individual within that part of the salary range within a reasonable amount of time. There's also some modest title adjustments, and we'll be talking with the employees about that tomorrow so that they all understand no one's lost their job. They just can't find their title perhaps. All right. There's some other recommendations that I've included in here that are wage related. And this is, when I give you recommendations, I always understand that there's going to be an element of analysis by the city to determine if those recommendations are really going to be in the best interest of the organization. And sometimes it just simply is not. By practice, the organization says that we're going to keep things status quo. The first thing that I've done, I've lumped in here into the singular line, is specialty pay and other compensation. There is a lot of additional pay that comes to your employees in a number of different topics or titles. And a lot of times organizations will do that because what you're trying to do is augment or elevate those wages because they're not necessarily market competitive. And so, well, let's give this extra incentive pay or that extra pay to try to elevate it up. Now, there are probably some meaningful specialty pays that the city might want to consider maintaining. But what I've suggested to the organization is to pause, take and reassess what is it that is actually truly needed for the organization and what is providing value to to each of those departments. Because if it is extra pay that was given just to try to elevate the base wages, those are the types of specialty pays that absolutely just should go. And so that you are truly focusing only on those wages that are going to bring an additional value to the city. And my recommendation is that you view this from a citywide perspective, not a department perspective. Now, there's a lot of specialty pays that are created and developed specific for their particular area, whether it's water, wastewater, or the police department or the fire department. And I absolutely understand that. And I would expect that some of that is going to be retained. But if there's an opportunity, and I think one is such as bilingual services was talked to me about by multiple departments, that there may be a need for individuals who have a secondary language, and what does that provide to your constituents in terms of level of service? Well, instead of having a program in this department or a program in that department, look at it from the overall lens of the organization and what value will that bring to the city as a whole, and look at it from that vantage point. So I've instructed, or I've recommended that the city do that. And I believe that they are going to take that to heart, and they are going to really do a full-on analysis of those specialty pays. It's probably going to require some additional conversations from the departments that are impacted. I do not want specialty pays to augment your wages, because you will have market competitive wages. The other areas are related to overtime. Right now, the city compensates overtime on hours paid versus hours worked. You are more generous than what the federal law requires you to be. And that is not uncommon in the public sector, and that's absolutely okay. However, it is an area, if you are, looking to have to reallocate resources, financial resources, I would rather you utilize those resources to ensure that you need to have, in order to ensure that you get base wages increase. I don't know that that is an area that the city is going to entertain at this point. And we will explain that to the employees. This is the recommendation, not necessarily an action item. And the last one is in the world of public safety, with what we call the 7K exemption that allows for your police and fire to work alternative schedules, because they are a 24/7 operation, and how we calculate the overtime. The overtime, or the annual schedules are developed under the 7K exemption. They're running their overtime a little different, so it's inconsistent. It's not unlawful or anything like that. It's just simply inconsistent between your two departments. And I am one for, gaining on that consistency, and that will be something that the city can look at in the future as well.
Before you
Yes,
go back up just one,
Sure.
On number 3, it's 4% total of the payroll total.
No, 4% total
Of the budget total?
Well,
or the
no,
payroll? What
it's,
total?
your employees, my recommendation is that specialty pay should not exceed 4% of their salary. So if they're
So
making.
not the bottom line payroll total.
No,
Mhm.
right, their hourly
All
rate,
right.
because otherwise what's going to happen
I see.
is you're gonna start creating some compression into the higher ranks.
Okay.
And, then there always becomes this, well, was it, is it part of my base or is it part of my base? And so we just want it to be that nod of, thank you very much for that additional service that you are providing, and here's a little bit of monetary thank you for that. It should not, augment, because otherwise we're gonna be talking about, well, put them in a different pay grade then. All right, the last thing to talk about, and then I'll turn it back over to administration, is the maintenance of the system, because we put a whole lot of time and effort into updating your model to give you something new. And there is going to be some instruction or recommendations on how to maintain that going forward. There are many organizations that, if you are following the maintenance instructions that we give you, that this model can work successfully for you for years to come. And it's very simple. The first one is that those salary ranges, they move, they change. The market is changing on an annual basis. And so as your external market that you compared yourselves to, as they adjust, then we're going to want to make sure that the city is adjusting commensurate to that, so that you maintain that average to the market. If the rest of the world around you is upping their salaries and Ottawa is not, then what you're going to find is you're going to lose your placement within the standard market. The employees, then we want to make sure that they also experience that in some way, and then you have their merit on top of that. So how I like to explain it is that this gross wage adjustment helps them maintain their position in the salary range each year. The performance is what helps them progress through it. There is the option for the city to have what we call market adjustments. What this allows you to do, or what it allows the city to do, is that if you have a blip in your market, sometimes it happens, where all of a sudden you've got an industry that is going out of whack, that's really official term, they're out of whack, that the city is going to have the ability to make a change within the salary range to help with retention purposes. We want this to be in a very limited basis. It's very controlled. It is not a mechanism for additional wages per se. It is a mechanism for retention. However, if you have identified we've got a problem with a specific position, and a common one of that I'm working with on the Missouri side right now is dispatchers. There is something going on where the dispatch wages they're just escalating very, very quickly. And so we're having to make some temporary modifications for that. until we do what we call a review of the external market. We call it a market update. We recommend organizations every 3 to 5 years do something on a very much smaller scale than what I've done to make sure that your salary ranges are continuing to align with the market. We find that if you do that about every 3 to 5 years, you should capture those little blips that occur within the market, and that allows you to make adjustments without it being a large cost each time you do it. And then the last thing is that we do have some policy recommendations on how you handle a new hire, a promotion, a demotion. So these are more tools in the toolbox to actually use the system that we have developed.
On that, sorry,
Yes.
do you guys recommend like some predetermined economic indicators? Or is that kind of up to the city to decide? Is that specific to?
Yeah, it really is up to the city, and I will say that it ends up being very regionalized. If West Coast, for example, they use a true CPI, and a lot of times they will do a blend, they'll do an average over 5 years just to kind of help keep it a little bit more level. In Kansas, it's not uncommon that you will go back to your comparators and you'll find out how much they have upped their wages so that you can make sure that you're within that ballpark. And you know, we've got a lot of variation from that state to state, but I mean, in the most simplistic form would be you contact the comparables that we use. How much are you elevating your wages? And then you determine a percentage from that. Yep.
Thank you.
All right, I'm not gonna talk a whole lot about this, just know that this is a key item that I am gonna talk to your employees about tomorrow, because a lot of them have questions about how in the world did you get my position in this respective pay grade. I will explain that methodology to them tomorrow. And then to close that out, and I'll turn it over to anyone in administration that wants to take the remote after me. I'm going to be wrapping up my 1.5 days here in Ottawa tomorrow morning. I will be meeting with all of the employees. We have 4 sessions. We're going to go through much the same of what I talked about. Maybe we're just going to focus on a couple of different things, those areas that are probably going to be feel a little bit more important to them, because I think that the questions that you might ask might be a little bit different. And then the implementation, I think I'm going to allow the administration team to talk about that. So with that said, can I answer any questions for you?
That change in the overtime that
Yes.
you were talking about there, do you have a definite dollar figure amount that we're talking about on an annual basis that savings would be, or is that?
I do not, your administration may have more information on that, but I personally do not know.
We can get into that further once we get into
Okay.
the next policy changes.
Any other questions I can answer for you?
I don't believe so.
I will be-
Yeah,
Thank
oh my
you.
God. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, they too.
Oh, I don't know when he shooed me with. No.
No, she's just saying she doesn't want to be up here with us.
Okay.
It's way above your grade, right?
Okay, are you guys ready for the next item on the agenda? The resolution?
Sure.
Which will get into this change, those policy changes. So the city of Ottawa has a personnel policy manual. Michelle has been working on revisions to that manual, and these are kind of a stopgap. They implement some of the recommendations that you heard today. They don't implement all of them. But recall that in the city manager form of government, it's the city manager who actually has the statutory and legal authority to manage the personnel of the organization. So what you're doing with this revision is implementing some of these changes and still respecting Brian's authority as the city manager to decide matters of pay and compensation. But we're working now within the framework of the compensation study and trying to make some of those changes. So you can see here in the last 3 pages, and Michelle, we can kind of go through some of them. Some of them, like the overtime change, Commissioner Skidmore, are not included right now. That may be a change we make in the future. But you can see that
A lot of the change here deals with how we are addressing terminology, whether that's annual increases to keep up with market and inflation, whether that's the merit adjustments that are made, and some of the terminology like top of the range or red circle. So Michelle, if you want to walk through
Sure.
30,000 foot view on this.
Okay, so, as mentioned in the recommendation memo, some of this was reorganized just for ease of use. So it was more organized. We did address, again, salary adjustments, for new hires that we could hire, an employee at the minimum of the grade, but if they had more experience, up to the control point. Formerly, we used the term a COLA, cost of living adjustment, but we're going to call that a gross wage adjustment. And that will occur unless deemed a different date by the city manager, the first full 2-week period of the year, each year, based on the annual budget process. We did plain mention the annual performance merit adjustment, which is tied to an employee's performance evaluation. Those typically happen at 6 months, 12 months, and then annually thereafter. And that process that's what happens now. That's not changing. And Blaine mentioned market adjustments, and that would be moving an employee through the pay scale. And promotions, there wasn't any defined percentage that I recall in the policy manual, and that would be 5% increase if over the minimum rate. Demotions were only mentioned briefly in the policy manual as it related to discipline. This policy defines a process in more detail for us. We also have top of grade, red circle, and red circle is a best practice terminology, that if somebody is beyond the top of the range or top of the grade, they would not receive an increase. Beyond that, our process, let's say, is a lump sum bonus, is when an employee still receives compensation, but it's a lump sum. Am I saying that accordingly? As far as position pay grade changes, if a department director looks at a position and wants to request a reevaluation, there's a process in place with these policies now that a department director would have to follow. We would work directly if the city manager does approve a reevaluation of that position. We would work directly with the consultant and follow those steps. We did discuss, Melena did talk about special pay increases, and again, we're evaluating those. That would be another evaluation by the city manager, if that's something that we would like to consider going forward. And overtime pay, this is, we're not making any changes, but we just restated the policy, so it's clear, the current practice that we have and policy that we have in place, so it's clear, more clear. And then holiday pay, we restated it's
For the hour, for the holiday itself, rather than the observed holiday.
right.
You have obviously workers who work and departments that operate 24/7. So we had in our old policy, it was correct, but the implementation had not been quite correct. That oftentimes the observed holiday was being paid, people working on the holiday were not getting the full benefit of actually working on the actual holiday, to the same extent that people were working on the observed. So Finance and HR had fixed this problem, resolved this problem earlier in the year. We saw this with Veterans Day, which is kind of a perfect storm of a holiday that was observed and a holiday that was actual and end of a payroll happening all at the same time. And we hope that doesn't happen again for a long time. I don't know if we've looked at the calendar to find out when that happens again, but that is not a good situation. So this clarifies about the pay for most 8 to 5 Monday through Friday workers get the observed holiday, but if someone's actually working on the holiday, they'll get the holiday pay for that day that they're actually working. So
all that's considered for a 24-hour period. If they work 8 hours in that 24-hour period, that's when it kicks in.
So go ahead.
Like firefighters will have a partial holiday pay and a partial non-pay after that.
Okay.
Do you have more you want?
All I want to add is that which is defined in the memo, the policies that we are recommending enhancing or changing are, in our opinion, best practice.
Commissioners, this resolution kind of really is the final stop for the compensation study process. It's been ongoing now for almost a year in terms of going out in the RFP and having a consultant come in and look through this. And you all made a commitment throughout the budget for next year that you wanted to hold some money back for salaries to address this market study. Really understanding that one of the, if not the greatest asset that the city has are the people who work for it and who deliver services to their fellow citizens in this community. And Michelle and Melanie have done yeoman's work on this project. Countless phone calls and Teams meetings and meeting with folks throughout the city, looking at personnel and positions, understanding what the job duties really are to a position, and working with the consultant to make sure that as we test the market out there, we can pay folks competitively and keep up with the market, but still understanding the obligation to be good stewards of the tax dollars that the city collects and to try to have the lightest touch possible on the pocketbooks of taxpayers here in the community, while recognizing and compensating appropriately the great resource that we have in our people. So we ask you today to favorably consider this resolution. This will implement the policy recommendations that staff believes need to be implemented to date. And the compensation study will go into full effect next month with paychecks at beginning on the January 6th pay period. So with that, commissioners will stand for any questions that you have.
I know we kind of projected what wage increases were needed before we had the study complete. How close are we going to be, do you think, to that projection?
Melanie?
So we have to consider 2 different factors. We knew going into this that we would need to reserve an amount of money. We had set aside a dollar figure that was equivalent to the difference between what your budget was and where we wanted that mill levy to be for 2024. And in addition to, we budgeted for salary increases for 2024 as well, your merit and gross wage adjustments like you would annually anyway. So we've used that entire pot of money as consideration for this because we went up to 3.5%. So at the minimum for each person would be 3.5. Some of it is, some people got more, some people got the 3.5. So within that, those amounts of money within each fund, and remember there's 5 or 6 different funds, 6 different funds that you have employees that are paid from. Overall, we're probably really close on all of them, or under what we would have budgeted for both the gross wage adjustment and what we anticipated for the results of the comp study. And so I believe that we probably fared more favorably than we probably even anticipated at the beginning of the study. So
As Melina talked about, part of that is you have a long tenured workforce. You have a lot of people who've been here a while, and we have found ways to keep them here. So we weren't as behind market as we thought we might be. But we do have a significant contingent of our employees who are behind market, who do need to be brought up to be competitive and to And I encourage you not to think of it as the employee, but as the position needs to be brought competitive no matter who's occupying it. And that's so that we get competent and capable and qualified people in here to deliver services to the people of Ottawa.
So for the employees that are at the top range, so red circle, are you telling me they don't get a COLA increase every year?
They would.
They would still get a
Well, it
COLA?
would be a gross wage adjustment.
Okay,
And if they're at the top, they would get a lump sum, like a lump sum bonus.
so there is a
That,
gross
that,
wage.
it's a
adjustment.
one-time payment.
And that's the whole point of, by utilizing the bands with a control point, the bands allow us to stay flexible. So as we increase that gross wage adjustment, whether it's a 3% or 2.5% or whatever, both of those will move up and down. And then if we understand that based upon the market, the top end's moving up and the bottom's not, then at that point we can address those individually and independently. But the whole premise is to stay competitive so that we can retain the individuals that we have, while at the same time keeping the minimum in that average range so that we can attract quality candidates for positions, because we just right now are having a difficult time. And it's not just us, it's across the board. And then you add the generational mobility that kind of also compounds the issue. So I think this is doing all that we can do, because there is a significant, not only opportunity cost in these vacancies and the inefficiencies that they create, but also a cost for advertising and a cost of bringing the whole organization to a halt to go through interviews, only to realize that either no one is actually qualified, or to have that individual seek employment elsewhere because we weren't competitive.
Your specific question, Mr. Mayor, I mean, imagine an employee who's been here 30+ years, they're at the top of that range. And what would happen in the past is that they would just keep getting their adjustment, they would keep moving the range. We don't want to move the range. The range is position dependent, not person dependent. So they take their gross wage adjustment as a lump sum and the range remains intact. Because if they left tomorrow, we wouldn't hire someone in at what they're making.
Right.
We'd hire someone in the range. So that's what red circle is.
Thank you for clarifying.
On that, I'm just thinking, if I was that person, the tax implications of a bonus versus a raise to your base salary, you're taking home less off of a
No,
bonus.
no, I can't.
Correct,
Well,
like, so that person who takes home the money is,
Yeah.
I would prefer, if it was me personally, that's where I'm like, just thinking about that, I'd rather have that increase than a one-time lump sum.
And of course, I think everybody would, right, a base billing type increase. However, in this case, we do have a small handful of our employees who are at top of the range right now. With the new range structure in front of you, we will not have anyone at top of the range. And annually, as we move that range, we shouldn't have anybody topping out within any short period of time. And if we are, then we probably need to reevaluate where they fit within that range, and or if they've taken on additional responsibilities, what have you, or look at the position itself. So I think we've been able to right size that with this proposed range, the new ranges that have been put together. I don't think we're gonna have that issue anytime real soon.
Which really highlights the other thing for you all as policymakers to consider and keep in mind. This is not a one-time exercise. Maintaining a compensation plan is an annual event, and you've been seeing in a number of areas, whether it's utilities, whether it's looking at budgeting and taxation. It is an ongoing effort to make sure that these things stay updated, that they stay maintained, that investments are made in the proper place so that we improve efficiency. And this will be another one of those things. I mean, it can't go 10 years. It's got to be updated. The ranges have to move with the market. And we're going to have positions within the city that are affected differently by the market than others. You're going to get a run on certain types of positions, and like that range has to be flexible, or we're going to lose good people.
And this is structured in such a way that it should last us a good 20 years if we administer it properly.
Well, we're seeing the effects of those rates right now anyway in our
Mhm.
departments, unfortunately. So we need to get to that market rate.
And it's not an exact science, that's the thing about it, I wish it was, but it's not, I guess, because it's our best guess on where to put these ranges. We've got so many different factors, no two cities are alike, I guess, that's the whole thing. And we have to use this information, best guess what we got here to be able to keep our people and to attract people when we need to have an opening. And that's where it's all, yeah. It's a good guess, I guess, but that's way to put it.
On that promotions, where it says they'll be at the base, essentially the minimum rate of the new salary range or rate closest that provides 5% increase. If over, is that saying if their previous pay was over the minimum rate or 5% above? the
They're
minimum?
like a senior lieutenant and they're topped out and then
Mhm.
they get promoted to captain, whether it's police or fire or whatever. That would be, we would give them at least a 5% range for that.
From
Bearing
their-
in mind that we
yeah.
still would then have to do a comparable to make sure that we're not jumping over someone that may have seniority in that new position as well.
Yeah,
So
you
that's the
might-
knock-on effect.
You might have someone who is making more in their current position than the new minimum of the next range, right? Because the ranges are, based on certain percentage increases above each. So, yeah, you wouldn't want to just move somebody, but they could even be over the new minimum. You wouldn't want, there's really no incentive to continue bettering yourself for that next range if there's no incentive or pay to do that as well. So that's
So
why
5% of what they were
selected the
making.
mix before.
And then understanding, part of why we really outline that, because then let's assume that you have been doing the captain position longer than I have, but I've got more timing in the organization, and then I'm promoted to captain, but you've got more captain experience. So it wouldn't be fair for me being topped out to come in ahead of you. So that's what, it allows us some flexibility there as well.
Commissioners, any other questions? If not, we are asking that you take action on this resolution today so that we can incorporate these changes. As you know, payroll is a ways out, but we want to make sure we have everything ready to go for the new year.
I think it was said earlier how important employees are. I thought even in my business, it's an asset you can't put on the balance sheet, but it certainly is an asset. And it's hard to value it. I know that. And I know what's involved when someone leaves and the training gap you have. It takes a while to get that person trained up to speed as well. You spend a lot of money doing that. And how many times we trained people at the bank and they went to another bank. I know what that was like. And it was a very challenging thing to work through. With all that said, I'll make the motion to approve this resolution. We've been talking about here, item B,
Second.
3B.
Any discussion?
Do we, along with this, and we may already have it, is there essentially a roadmap? If I start as, maintenance worker for parks, is there a roadmap that person can view for their promotion schedule through as they improve? That they could move from maintenance worker to maintenance worker 2 or anything like that we provide?
Yes, we're working on individual development plans for that, and that was something that we did bring up with our supervisor groups this morning.
Yeah, just so people kind of know what their next, if they want to go move on, they kind of have a path, a roadmap established.
Exactly.
Any other discussion? Can I get a roll call vote, please?
Mayor Pro Tem Skidmore,
Yes.
Commissioner Graves,
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor,
Yes.
Commissioner Clayton,
Yes.
and Mayor Crowley.
I vote yes, motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Elena, thank you. Appreciate all the hard work that everybody's put into this. That'll move us on to comments by our city manager.
I'll keep it brief since I'm losing my voice, but for the next meeting, well, I don't mean to steal some of your thunder, but just want to highlight that, remind everyone that we'll have our budget adjustment public hearing for some administrative disbursements related to excess revenues that were collected in excess of the operating budget, and some expenditures in some newly created funds this year. And then also the neighborhood revitalization property abatements or rebates, I'm sorry, for the 22 residential and 2 commercial properties, and then looking for the study session for discussion on some no parking zones that were formerly a school that's by a church. The charter ordinance for the commission seating, a potential BZA and planning commission interview that will be finalized, airport CIP priorities for adoption on the 20th of September after a study on the 11th and 18th, and some other potential as well for the I'm sorry, public consumption area as well. So those are the items that we have kind of outlined ahead.
Thank you. Comments by the governing body, Commissioner Graves,
I have no comment.
Commissioner Taylor,
This time.
Commissioner Clayton,
None at this time.
Mayor Pro Tem Skidmore.
I guess we didn't include commissioner salaries in that review. I failed to get to that point, I guess. That's my fault. So, but
We do pull those actually.
Well, that would be interesting next time around. Anyway, I had to.
I have no other comments. We do have I do have a couple of announcements at 6:30 this Wednesday evening. We will have our annual commission photo. Following that will be our regular meeting at 7 PM here at City Hall. Anything else to come before the commission this evening? I'll adjourn.